the reason that you wouldn't do this is the pure overwhelm, right? The feeling of being overwhelmed that you have to do this big, huge, hairy thing and that you can't do it well. And for so many of us, it's like, well, if I can't execute well, I just won't do it. But when she brings that bar of success down to something that's manageable and reasonable and within, that we all have agency for, that's kind of what pushes people over the edge. And I find that a lot of what she says is like that.
Welcome to Scholé Sisters, the podcast for the classical homeschooling mama who seeks to learn and grow while she's helping her children learn and grow. Scholé Sisters is a casual conversation about topics that matter to those of us in the trenches of classical homeschooling who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. I'm your host, Brandy Venzel. You can find me over at afterthoughtsblog.net, spreading my Charlotte Mason joy through blog posts, study guides, audios, and more. My co-host today is Abby Wall. Abby is basically the queen of the Scholé sistership. Abby is a country-living farmer, rancher, a loving wife, and mom of 5 who homeschools and reads whenever she can. Our guest today is Amber Johnston. Amber lives in Georgia, nestled among pine trees, hammocks, and zip lines with her husband and their 4 children. Her happy place is the back porch on a rainy day, preferably with a giant mug of hot tea and a good book. When they have the chance, her family enjoys extended world schooling trips to immerse themselves in other cultures. Amber blogs about adding mirrors and windows to a traditional Charlotte Mason education at heritagemom.com, and you can also find her on Instagram as @heritagemomblog. Are you intimidated by commonplacing? Not sure if you're doing it right? Uncertain how to get started? You're not the only one. Tomorrow, if you're listening to this episode right away, on February 20th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific, you can join Scholé Sisters for a live Commonplace Workshop where we will break down the process of getting started and keeping up with commonplacing. It doesn't need to be complicated and you don't need to make it a keepsake. At the Commonplace Workshop, we'll each share our own commonplace practices and real-life examples, helping you see how doable and unfancy and how beneficial commonplacing can be. Go to scholésisters.com/commonplace to register. Today's episode is all about tackling a foreign language. Amber is not just wonderful about telling you how to go about foreign language, she also gives you a big why. Let's face it, foreign language can be intimidating, and so we put it off until the kids are older. If we're going to get brave and start them young, we need a really big why. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start off with our Scholé every day. And Abby, let's have you go first.
I am reading, I'm listening to an audiobook right now, and it is Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey.
Oh.
So it is Homer, but Emily Wilson, I think, is the only female scholar who has done a translation that's been published.
Yeah.
And it is lovely. And Claire Danes does the audiobook on Audible. And so she is really nice to listen to. She has a great voice, I think. I'm loving it. I've just been noticing so many more things. I mean, I know the story and I know I think I read it years ago, or at least I've had children's versions of it and I know enough of it. And I went through a Greek gods phase where I just loved mythology and things like that. And so many of these stories are in those mythology anthologies, I guess.
True, yeah.
So I'm really familiar with a lot of things, but I don't think I've ever start to finish done all of it in one. And since it's audio, I'm listening to it and I just find I'm adding to my walks a little bit longer so I can listen, because it's like somebody's telling you a story. And I think that probably because it was in the oral tradition, it's great to be read to like that. And she can't remember which one it is, but she put it in hexameter or the other one. And I can't remember now but she put it in kind of a poetic form. It doesn't rhyme, but it is
interesting.
Just,
so there's a rhythm.
The cadence of, there's a beautiful cadence and rhythm to the words. So
how far in are you?
Odysseus has been rescued and he is telling his story. And so he's just talking about how he rescued his men from Circe with Hermes' help. And they do talk about things, but it's not graphic. So, I would let my kids listen to this. It's been really good.
That's actually why I've been thinking about buying a translation, because I already have 2 or 3 different translations, and I'm not a big translation collector.
Yeah.
I don't have enough shelf space to indulge myself in those things. But I was reading some article where she was talking about how some of the more modern translators over sexualized their translations, and about how hers is cleaner, but it's not because she's trying to clean something up. It's because she actually is trying to translate it the way that it is in the Greek.
Yeah.
Interesting. But it sounded to me like, some of those parts that I'm kind of glossing over when I'm reading aloud to little boys, maybe I wouldn't have to do that. So,
well, it's a lot similar to how the Bible portrays sex. Maybe not in the Song of Songs, but but in all the other parts, it just says it matter-of-factly, and that's it. And there isn't as much. Now, she does talk about Circe's bed a little bit, but so does Proverbs.
Right. Oh,
right?
Yeah, totally.
So this is stuff that I would feel comfortable having my kids listen to it, and we probably will. It's just really well done. And I don't know if I never noticed it before or if it's just because I'm seeing a theme, but there are so many references to different colors, which I just found was really neat. Not just the wine dark sea, but also the salt gray sea and purples and blues and all these different things. Colors just keep coming up as a theme. If I were highlighting this, if I was doing a physical copy, I would be I'm just going to start noticing how many times they say this. The sea has many different colors. So it's just interesting.
It is interesting.
Anyway. So highly recommend.
Cool. Amber, what about you?
Well, I am reading A Tree Grows in Brooklyn right now.
Ooh.
So I know. And I'm sure so many people have already read it, but I am one of those people who got stuck outside of the country when COVID first broke out.
Oh,
and I came back feeling nostalgic for me some America. Okay. I was like, my country, 'tis of thee, And so I started really digging. I had finished my Antonia and I was like, okay, that was the West. I liked the whole family of immigrants theme. And I was like, where can I get more of that? And decided to kind of go here next. So I've been happy with it. But I don't know. I was just thinking, I was like, where are those stories about the grit and how we persevere and, what it means to be American. So a little sappy of what took me there, but it's been really good so far.
I have to confess, I haven't read it. I feel terrible even saying this. I haven't. It's been on my list forever because it was one of my grandmother's favorite books. And she was constantly telling me I should read it. And I just kind of blew her off. And I feel terrible about this. So she passed away this year and I am inheriting her library. And so I expect that I will have my own copy very soon. So it's on my list of future reads. I decided since I put it off way too long, I'm going to wait so that I can read her copy because I'm curious if she marked it up or not. I don't know. But anyway, but she just always talked about how wonderful it was. She loved it.
It's really good. And it's a quick read. It's an easy read, but it's kind of deep. When you get those older characters, the people's mamas and everything pouring into their lives, giving them advice. And I even saw little Charlotte pop up in there. This poor illiterate mother tells her daughter when she has a baby, she's the mom is like, I don't know what to do with this baby. We don't know much. We don't have any education. How can I do right by her? And she's like, I don't know. But all I know is every day, read her a little Shakespeare and something from the Bible. And that's what she did. Yeah, she did that for her daughter, but she knew nothing else to do. So it's split up into 5 books. That's how the chapter is split. And I'm only in book 3 right now. So I can't say how it all plays out, but I'm really liking it. It's very good.
Sounds good.
And then main character, the book starts with her at 11 and it goes and carries through till she leaves for college at 17. And my oldest just turned 11. So that was another thing that kind of, I thought
nostalgia.
Totally. That's why I said it's all sappy reasons why I picked this book. But I was like, okay, she's 11 and I'm going to watch this kind of coming to age of this character. And, I'll really be in tune with what's happening with an 11-year-old girl at that time.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Now I really need to read it before my girls get too much older.
Yes, definitely. I recommend it. I really do.
Well, mine is a book I haven't started reading, you guys, but I'm sitting here holding it and I've been looking at it lovingly for days now. But I told myself I have to finish some other books before I let myself open it because this book is over 700 pages long. And I just thought I'm going to drop other things if I let myself start it before I finish some other things. So it's In the First Circle by Alexander Solzhenitsyn or Nitsyn. I think I said it wrong. And I have been watching for this, and this particular translation from the Russian went out of print, but it was the one that I wanted because, okay, so I guess this is how Solzhenitsyn did this. So Solzhenitsyn was in a gulag as a young man, and then he got out, and in his 30s, he wrote this book. But then in his 40s, he was trying to get it published in the USSR, and so he self-censored the book. And the things that he took out were some of the things that I think I probably will find very meaningful, like the Christianity of a certain character and someone who was basically being a double agent and spying for the Americans in Russia. So he took out about, I guess it was like 13 chapters.
Wow.
But it was self-censorship, which means they had the original. So when this translation was done, they went back to the original before he self-censored. But I believe he was still alive. And so he actually touched it up a little bit and then they translated it into English. So the book's really old because it was written in the 50s, but I think the translation's like 10 years old, maybe. Anyway, I was waiting to be able to get a copy of this particular one. And so I had ordered it and it was just one of those, I think it was because of COVID or something. It was one of those things where it was just, we haven't mailed it yet. We haven't mailed it yet, kind of forever. So it came last week. And I'm just counting down the days to when I can start it. I've heard that even though it's a novel, it's very autobiographical in terms of what it was like. Because the setting is the kind of gulag that Solzhenitsyn was in. It was like what do they call it? A sharashka, I think is what they call it. So it was like they would use some of the like highly skilled gulag inmates as kind of like their slave labor for like even military intelligence or something. So they might use them for code breaking or I don't know, whatever the Russians thought they needed at the time. So Solzhenitsyn, I'm not really sure a whole lot about him. I mean, I've read some of his stuff, but I don't know a whole lot about what his qualifications were because I know him as a writer and I'm not sure how that would be helpful to the Russians spying on people, but he apparently was in one of those kinds of gulags. So he writes a lot of himself and his own experience into the novel. I'm very excited to start it. I've been waiting a long time.
That's good.
Yeah, I haven't read much of his fiction. I read A Day in the Life of Ivan Desinovich, and that's a way less of the commitment, right? Because it's a novella.
Oh yeah.
I felt like this was even more than Charles Dickens. Like I'm committing to probably a year here.
And it's Russian, so I'm sure it's really uplifting. Yeah, well, wonderful.
What is that? I keep seeing this meme going around where it's like the French are, I will die for love. And the Americans are like, I will die for freedom. And the Russians are like, I will die. Yeah, I love it.
That's good.
Hi. Abby here to give you an inside look into the community we call the Sistership. Sistership is the best homeschool mom support group on the internet. If you want to skip the shallow tips and tricks that usually passes for homeschool help, if you hate the superficial positivity that usually passes for homeschool encouragement, if you long for rich, meaningful conversations about not only homeschooling, but also all the spheres of knowledge that are opening up to you as you read. If you want to read more and think more with like-minded moms, then you belong in the Sistership. Join us today. Go to skolesisters.com/sistership.
Let's go ahead and transition to our topical conversation. And today we are going to talk about foreign language learning. And I really want us to start with a solid grasp of why we would do such a thing. Because unless you're already bilingual, and I know, Abby, I know that you are, but unless you...
Well, I mean, it's rusty.
Yeah, so, right.
And I've done a terrible job.
Trust me, it's more than me.
Same.
So, I mean, unless you count Spanglish, it's about as good as it gets. So unless you're already bilingual, when you start homeschooling, you just have so many different areas where you know that you're weak, that teaching your children a second language feels like this insurmountable task. And so I think a lot of us who aren't already bilingual, in order to even try before junior high, we need a really big why to motivate us to do the hard work. Amber, we're going to put in the show notes a link to the blog post that you wrote back in 2018, where you said it was called Why Homeschoolers Have a Moral Obligation to Study Foreign Language. And I loved what you wrote, especially where you talked about how Charlotte Mason just went and shook up your homeschool. So I would love for you to tell your story in your own words. I was thinking about reading it out loud, but I know that you even have the quote with you. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and you can tell us, what did Charlotte Mason do to you?
Okay. Well, basically, I'm not fluent in any other languages. And so I knew from the beginning when I was studying kind of what my children's education would look like, that was a part of it. But I was like, yeah, but no, I'm going to let them do that later, because how do I teach something that I don't know? That would require me to learn it. So I kind of just released myself from that requirement. And also, given that I didn't start learning it until I was older. And so I thought they'll do the same thing. And I feel like this happens so often. I'll make a decision and then I'll find myself, digging in her volumes or reading with my study group, and something convicting that she writes really pierces me. And so that's basically what happened. I was reading volume 2 and I got to this part and she says, take, for example, the question of what we should teach children. Is there one subject that should take priority over other subjects? Yes, one group of subjects has an imperative moral claim on us. The nation is obligated to have relationships of brotherly kindness with other nations. Since the family unit is an integral part of the nation, it's the duty of every family to have brotherly dealings and conversations with the families of other nations when the occasion arises. Therefore, learning the languages of neighboring nations is more than a way to gain knowledge and culture. It's an obligation of moral duty that helps realize the goal of universal brotherhood. For that reason, every family should try to cultivate 2 languages besides its own from the time the children are tiny. And so, I mean, wow. I read that and it really reframed things for me. At this time, the time that I read that, my children were very young. And I realized after reading this that I had started slipping back into that original thought pattern that I had, that this was about academics. And it was about the thought of learning a language to be learned, because that's what you do here and it'll help you get into college and all of that. After I read that, all that went out the window. And I was like, that has nothing to do with that. Yeah. This is actually about connecting. When she talked about universal brotherhood and connecting through humanity, it pricked me. It convicted me. It made me realize that, one, that wasn't my choice to decide whether my children learn that or not, because I am the conduit. I'm the only way. I have the key to that aspect of their education right now. And so I don't get to choose. This is just my own conviction. I'm not saying this has to be for anyone else, but I felt like I don't get to choose not to introduce that to them. Yeah. And that's not within my rights. And so that kind of set me up to just dig in. And I accepted it then. I still accept it now. It is wholly imperfect, the way that we're doing it. A non-fluent mom trying to teach her children a language that she hasn't mastered. But the whole aspect of it for me is that I'm going to go down trying. I'm going to fight. That's
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and you're really echoing Charlotte Mason, even in what you're saying after you read the quote, because I distinctly remember places where she talks about, we don't have the right to choose. We don't have the right to choose whether the child shall learn Latin or learn math or learn science. These are his things that he inherits as a human, and we owe it to him to try to give it to him as best as we can. It doesn't mean we do it perfectly, but I feel like you're so on the right track, because we often lose that vision of, this is actually our duty as people who are raising little humans, to give them all the different parts of what it takes to be a good human.
That's right.
I love what you said here.
And I think for me, it also, I was reading recently, or someone was talking about the concept of motherhood and that it's broader than just the children that are in our homes, but thinking of ourselves as mothering to all children. Like we're mothers standing in the gap for other people's children as well. And I started thinking about my children learning a foreign language is not just about the way that they will walk through the world or what they'll be able to do, but it also has to deal with the recipient of their ability to converse in another language. And that could be someone else's child. And that also helped me with that motivation to think beyond just my family.
So what was the first language you started teaching your children?
So I definitely went with Spanish. Okay. And that was kind of a no-brainer for me because of all the languages that there are, that are available. I did take Spanish in high school. And the funny thing is, I remember my senior year getting the award of the top Spanish student in my school. And I don't know how. I know all I can say is no one else must have tried. That's all. That's all I can say, because I certainly did not remember any of it by this time. But I made a little joke, and I was like, "I know Ebonics pretty well, but I was like, that's not going to count. I don't think. I mean, I could roll with it for a while, but." Yeah, so I had taken Spanish in high school and I at least knew the basic.
Yeah.
The second thing was that where we live, there are a lot of native Spanish speakers in the area, not in our immediate area, but we live outside of Atlanta. So within an urban city, you have a lot, we have a lot of Spanish speakers. So I thought, well, at least we'll have the opportunity to practice. I also thought about who are our nearest neighbors. When you think about that brotherhood she's talking about, the kinship with other countries. And I thought you have Mexico, you have Cuba, you have Puerto Rico. And so from a geography perspective, similar to what she did, right? What Charlotte Mason did in terms of picking her languages, like why would she, what's up with the French? Makes so much sense. I said, let me think broader rather than just jumping to French automatically, which no problem with that because you could argue Canada, parts of Canada as well. But I thought, let me use that same thinking and think geographically with Spanish. And the other thing is that I had my heartstrings pulled by being on the other side of several conversations. We have a lot of immigrants who are speaking Spanish in our area and people feeling disgruntled or frustrated about it. And I thought, what a great language to be able to help people locally communicate, to keep the frustration down, to help people feel more welcome or whatever it may be. So that's kind of where I came up with that.
So when I say I'm fluent, Brandy, I'm fluent in Portuguese.
Okay.
But I have never taught my children Portuguese.
I was going to ask.
Brazilian Portuguese. I have been teaching my kids Spanish. When you know one language fairly well, other languages come a lot easier, I think. And I know that this is going to sound really, bold, but I don't remember who says it, but once you won't ever know your first language until you know your second language. When I was 16, I was an exchange student in Brazil for about a year, and I learned Portuguese. I went knowing how to sing Happy Birthday to You in Portuguese. And that
was your sole talent.
We had some Brazilian exchange students that year, and so they taught me some things, but basically, please, thank you, and happy birthday to you. And I can still sing it.
That's awesome.
Just very accurately. So I can still read Portuguese. I can still communicate with Brazilians when I hear them speaking. And I have some Brazilian friends. But for the most part, it wasn't going to be something that I was going to be practicing on a daily basis because there just aren't that many Brazilians
in
here
Oregon.
In my city. Yeah, in Oregon. I mean, there's, you would be surprised how many I'm like, hey, you're speaking Portuguese. We're, so falando português.
Well, and isn't that like anything where once you start to notice it, you realize how much more there is than you ever noticed before? And
I do live in a college town, so we do have, I guess, more diversity for people. But for the most part, in agriculture, speaking Spanish is what we are going to do.
Right.
So we have been doing Spanish and things like that. And so you can learn languages. I just ended up, I studied French in high school and then went to Brazil, learned Portuguese. And then when I came home in college, I tested high enough into Spanish that I got to skip quite a bit because it is similar. but not the same. And so once you know one, you can do it. But what I was going to say is when you know a foreign language, you learn your own language better. When I left for my exchange, usually people take their SATs their junior years. I had to take it my sophomore year because I was going to be missing my junior year in high school. And when I came back, I took it again as a senior. My verbal scores improved a significant amount.
Wow.
And I had not spoken English. So I'm not saying that there isn't some academic reasons, but I was surprised. My math scores went down, but luckily they just averaged those two. But my verbal went way up. So that was something that learning that foreign language really does make a difference for learning English.
I like that. I hadn't really thought of it, but it makes a lot of sense because a lot of times with your first language, you don't even necessarily need to learn all of the mechanics and rules and whys and how-tos because you're just picking up what you hear. But when you're approaching a new language, a lot of times you're getting the whys and how-tos and framework up front. So I could see how that would work.
Well, and embarrassingly, when I went to Brazil, the kids would come and ask me for English homework help. And embarrassingly, they had to tell me what the parts of speech were because my public school education hadn't told me what those things were called.
Okay, no, I totally believe you because I remember teasing my friends in high school where Spanish was their first language, and I'd be asking them for help. And they're giving me the wrong answers. And they're like, I don't know. Like, what they were explaining, we don't talk this way at home, And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to ask you for help anymore because I have a better grade than you. And I never understood how that was possible. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I guess it's like the water you're swimming in. The language that you speak is the water you're swimming in all the time. And does a fish really notice the water? Like we notice the water because we live in air.
Yes.
Interesting.
I was thinking, I want to swing back really quick before we move on to this idea of like the universal brotherhood of mankind. And I was just thinking about scripturally about how all of mankind did speak the same language originally. And then we're told that when we were rebellious, our punishment at the Tower of Babel was that our languages were mixed up. And what did that do? It divided all of us. So people I'm trying to remember exactly how the Bible puts it, but people dispersed according to their tongue, basically. But then we have that beautiful picture of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, I think, where when Christ comes and he begins to reconcile all things to himself and therefore one man to another man, the very first thing that happens is that everyone hears the gospel in their own language. I know that wasn't a permanent situation. That was a miraculous thing, but I feel like it really gives us a vision, though, for how unifying language is, that being able to have a common tongue. And I don't even think the ideal necessarily is to go back to one single language, but it's being able to be multilingual and speak to a bunch of different people. I just love the way that it recognizes our universal humanity. Like it's bringing mankind back together in a way that we've been divided for so long by language. I mean, and it's natural to be divided by language. We don't understand each other. That was kind of the point. But how beautiful it is that in Acts, we see that vision of, the Lord didn't just leave us unable to understand each other. He gave us the ability to comprehend the message that was being sent. I don't know. I love that picture. And I feel like Charlotte Mason's capturing that and then telling us it doesn't have to be like a big system, that every family has the power to remedy it in their own little sphere of influence. I just love that.
Definitely. That was very encouraging because, the reason that you wouldn't do this is the pure overwhelm, right? The feeling of being overwhelmed that you have to do this big, huge, hairy thing and that you can't do it well. And for so many of us, it's like, well, if I can't execute well, I just won't do it. But when she brings that bar of success down to something that's manageable and reasonable and within, that we all have agency for, that's kind of what pushes people over the edge. And I find that a lot of what she says is like that. She says something that at first you feel like, well, I can't do that.
Yeah.
The more you think about it, if you feel convicted about it, your mind starts talking to you. You're like, can I or can't I, or do I not want to?
Right.
And that's, I think, where I was. If I'm going to be honest with myself, I can. I do not, I did not want to. Right. And now I do want to. And when I shifted from not wanting to wanting to, then I did.
Yeah.
So I think that's, sometimes we're the ones that are standing in our own way. It's just in terms of reframing our motivation for why we would go through the trouble of doing something.
So true.
And then by the time you get ready to do it, you realize it doesn't feel like trouble anymore. I think that's what happened to me. So it wasn't so much like, okay, fine, I resign myself to do this. This is what Charlotte said. For me, it was more, I understand, and now I want to do this.
I love that. Well, and she does say every family should try. So I feel like she's not setting a super high bar.
Right.
And she's not saying every family should definitely be multilingual. She's saying we should try. And I feel like some of this is multi-generational work. We try to help our children, give our children something more than what we received. And in turn, hopefully, our grandchildren will receive more than they received because of just like they have a different foundation they're building on. So, I didn't get Spanish till high school. My kids got Spanish way younger than that. And while we're not bilingual, my hope is that my grandchildren maybe will actually be like bilingual from all the work that's gone on with that middle generation between nothing and everything.
Right.
What I was hearing from you guys was that you choose a language based upon, and I guess if we go back to the quote, if our goal is this sort of courtesy to other people, then it makes sense to choose the language that you would actually use with real people that you would actually encounter in your real life. So,
and or where you travel to.
And okay, yes, fair enough. That's true. Because with the English, they were going to France a lot too. It wasn't just that there was French speaking in England going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. My daughter a few years ago had the opportunity to travel with a couple of her aunts, my husband's sisters. They were going to work in an orphanage in Romania. And so when we knew that she was going to go on this, we spent quite a bit of time. And we just used Duolingo because, finding Romanian language learning was actually kind of challenging. So we learned some very simple phrases. Because I've traveled quite a bit. And so learning a few things that's really important are like, hello, and what time is it? And where is this? And I need to use the restroom. Can I use your restroom? Are things that are very important. And thank you. And so we learned quite a few things for her to go on this trip. And she learned a lot more there, but she was able to very simply communicate to her host country or where she went, to Romania. So
how old was she when she went there?
Oh, I think around 11 or 12.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
What an experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. She got to hold babies in the orphanage and do preschool with some of the younger kids.
Wow.
And it was, very formational for her.
So anything else in how to choose the first language from either one of you? Anything else you think parents should consider when they're trying to figure out what
the only other thing I would think is, which I consider too for our second language, which will be starting soon. For me, I'm going with French, and the reason because I have help. So my mom was a French minor. And so you can also consider, as you're thinking of how you're going to go about this, is there some family connection? Is it your neighbor, your best friend? Is there someone close who is willing to pour into your child that can contribute to the learning? And so that, I think, is another aspect as well.
That is a great point. One of the ways that I ended up being able to start on Spanish earlier than I would have probably been comfortable with was that we have a mother-in-law apartment in our backyard, and the gal that was renting it was really much more comfortable in Spanish than she was in English. I mean, she could speak English, but it was very difficult for her. And she would take my children on nature walks or like little walks around the block, and they were quite little, and talk to them about what they were seeing in Spanish. And I just thought, even if Spanish is a very logical language for anybody in California because we used to be part of Mexico and there's a lot of native Spanish speakers here. But even if that hadn't been the case, it was too good to pass up this native speaker living in our own backyard who's willing to take them on a walk.
Yes.
And talk to them about what they see. I mean, it was just too perfect. Okay. So when do you start?
I say as soon as possible. So I think that being able to integrate words as you're talking, if you think about it, a lot of times with children, you're teaching them short sentences and kind of commands as they're little. No, don't sit there, or come here, or put that down, or be quiet. Those are perfect things that are easy to learn in a lot of languages that you can start to integrate in. So I started with, maybe 10 phrases, because that's about all I could hold in my brain at that time, and started using them. And my last child has been my biggest guinea pig, because he wasn't born until after we had already arrived here. So
wow.
I would just talk. I still do it now. Talk to him if I ask him to come over and sit down, or to be quiet, or when I was teaching colors, like talking to him about what color things are, using Spanish words for colors, just the things that I do know. I don't know everything, but I do know enough to talk to him a little bit, and they pick it up immediately. So it's not something that requires a lot of repetition.
For us, we have to think of the English word first and then the Spanish word. But when you do it like that, they don't even have to think of the English word. They just think of the other language word. Like if you say pink and rosa, right? They're the same thing. They're not having to do the double translation.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. And I noticed that when we traveled as well, at one point we had someone helping us every day in the house, and she didn't speak English and was only speaking to all of us in Spanish. And I'm over here like struggling. Okay. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm murdering. I can tell when I'm not speaking correctly. Like, I know I didn't conjugate that verb. Okay. I know it, but hopefully you understand. But by the time we left, my two youngest children understood 100% of what she said to them. Now, it wasn't a miracle. They couldn't speak back to her, but the fact that they understood everything she said. If she said, go upstairs, get your diaper, and, bring your milk, or go sit at the table with your milk, or whatever it was, they understood everything. And it showed me how quickly, I had read that before, but sometimes I'm like, yeah, that works for other people's kids, but that's not going to work for my kids. And I saw how quickly and how much it really did work. And it convinced me. It was amazing, really. It was amazing.
So the ideal way to do this, I feel like if anybody was living the ideal, it was you, Amber.
Yeah.
I know COVID totally screwed that up for you.
Yeah, it did.
But can you just describe what you guys were doing before I'm assuming you would like to go back to this when all this is blown over.
Yeah. So we did get to complete one trip. So this was part of my idea with Spanish. Again, I was on fire. Okay. It's like a new believer. I was like, yes, I'm going to do this. And I thought,
you went all in.
I know, I really did. I was like, the quickest way to rip the Band-Aid off is for us to just go to a place where they only speak Spanish. Okay. Because we're not going to die, and we're not going to leave, and we'll figure it out. And that's what we did. So we went and spent 3 months in Bolivia, in South America. And for anyone that doesn't know, that is not a tourist destination. And there ain't no Starbucks and McDonald's where we were. And so it is not a place where people are bilingual. They do not speak English at all. And so for us to live there, you either sit at home and be quiet, or you get out there and do the best you can. And so that's what we did. And what I found was that, one, the children did a lot better than me, because they're uninhibited. So they'll just do it. They want things. They're children. They're self-centered in some way, and they want what they want. And a lot of times for my children, that was to play. They wanted to play with the other children that they saw. And in order to play, they have to speak. And they figured it out. And I felt a lot of embarrassment. So I wasted my first few weeks feeling embarrassed and nervous while they plowed through. And so it was through watching them and seeing the reaction of the local people, how open they were if you just try. And so I kind of just started doing that. It was broken. My Spanish was very broken. I focus a lot on nouns, adjectives, and verbs. And those pretty much get me by. And I say things in an awkward way at times. But what helped me get through my feelings of embarrassment, my ultimate goal is to be able to communicate. Okay. I would like to be able to communicate beautifully. That's where I'm headed. I want to get there. But in the meantime, if I can get you to understand what I'm saying, that is a win and something to celebrate. And so my Spanish is not good. And there were times like I couldn't think of the word muñeca for doll. And so I said, I was looking for a doll for my daughter. I said, a not real baby that little girls play with. You know what I'm saying? Like things
That's awesome.
like that. Yeah. And so I was trying to tell him how to tell the taxi driver how to get back to where we were living. And he was lost. And I was like, I wanted him to go over the bridge. And I said, drive on the yellow thing that goes over the water,
Nice.
and he got us home. So I think that are those beautiful ways. I'm not suggesting people go and have clunky speech, but I guess there's a place to start. And that's how we started. So we spent, day in and day out. The benefits of being there were that we were forced to use the language all day, every day. And also because of the exchange rate there, I could afford to have someone come into the house every day to work with us on our Spanish. And so that's something, obviously I can't afford when we're here. So
yeah. Wow.
Well, if you think about it, how kids learn language, it's just like you were doing, right? I go home. I want cookie, like they even mess up and make things clunky and they explain things in funny ways. And we just naturally teach them. I have found that when I'm traveling, people are so willing to give you a lesson. I usually bring a dictionary and I usually find a picture dictionary is really helpful. And I had someone on our way from England to France sit with me in the channel and give me French lessons because my French was terribly rusty from my very small amount of lessons. And people at restaurants were very welcoming and they told me how to say l'eau robinet, which is tap water instead of the $8 bottle of water. Right? Like they are like, they're super, super. I have met so many gracious people. Now, that's not to say that some people in France, were not necessarily impressed with my French speaking abilities, but I will say on the whole, many of them were very kind and very gracious once you said, bonjour, monsieur or mademoiselle. As long as you address them appropriately, they will talk to you. If you don't, they will roll their eyes at you and then start the conversation over.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. There were times when we were met with, some not as friendly reactions to my poor Spanish, but that was not the norm. And I actually appreciated those times as well, because it gave me a better understanding of what it feels like to come to the States when you're trying and people are being impatient with you and maybe rolling their eyes, or you can see from their physical reaction how annoyed they are. And it helped me see how bad that felt. So that was helpful in a way.
Did you get any pushback from anybody on deciding to do this and kind of your whole world schooling thing that you were doing and all was everybody excited for you, or did you have to defend yourself?
There are times even now I still have to explain. So that was our first trip. And then our last trip was this recent trip here less than a year ago when we were in Europe. And the idea was we were going to travel to some Spanish speaking countries, practice our Spanish, a couple other places. And then we were going to end up in France and spend several weeks in France, getting our feet wet to come back home then and launch into our second language. So we were supposed to be there for 3 months, and 3 weeks in, the world started falling apart. So
wow.
That's kind of what happened. But yeah, mostly the things that people question the most is it worth the effort and expense for young children? Like your children are so young, they're not even going to remember this. And so for that, I often have 2 things I say. One, my children don't remember nursing either. But as a mother, I felt that was what I felt was best for them at that time. And there was a benefit to it that isn't involved in their memory. But I do think it still helped form a relationship there between the 2 of us in those early months and years.
That is a fabulous analogy. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's where I am. The youngest kids may not remember it, but although I would challenge it because people would be surprised when they pop out and say something, but they don't remember the same things we remember. They don't remember the name of the UNESCO site we visited and things like that. They remember people. They remember who owned the market. They remember the neighbors. They remember the kids they played with outside, the little old lady who always gave them a piece of fruit when we walked by the stall. So they remember people, lives, humanity. Isn't that the whole point of the trip anyway? They don't quite so much remember everything we saw in a random museum. So I will give you that. The other thing people are really up in arms about is that my husband does not have a location. Let me correct that. Before COVID, my husband did not have a location independent job, but I think he's just proven now that in fact he does. So I'll be curious to see what they say after this, but he can't stay in these 3-month trips with us. And so he comes with us to make sure that we have safe passage to where we're going. And then he leaves and comes back here to the States. And so I think there has been a lot of shock where people have been like, so it's just you and the kids in these foreign countries. And I'm like, it's just me and the kids. So yeah, I think, again, I'm pretty tenacious. Once I have an idea in my head of what I want to do and my husband's on board with it, I'm just like, I'm just going to do it. I think it's worth it. That's what FaceTime is for. It's only 12 weeks at a time. It's not even 12 weeks because he's there part of the time. So maybe 10 weeks that we're without him. And it's been life-changing for all of us.
Did he come back to take you home also, or was it just the way there?
Okay, so on our first trip when we went to Bolivia, he did. He came back and picked us up, and we had a vacation on the front end in Peru and a vacation with him on the back end. So I don't vacation much. That's another thing. People are like, oh my gosh, you were in South America. You went to Brazil. You went here. You went here. I'm like, girl, you don't even want to go to Disney World by yourself without your husband. And you're asking me, do I fly all around the continent? So one, we're not independently wealthy. So we save money and we're paying cash for these trips. So we can't afford to go to South Beach, the equivalent of South Beach every day. But also I'm only human and I can't travel all over continents alone, but I can do a little bit. So for the most part, he takes us there, he picks us up. Now, the funny thing is this European trip, I said, blow all your vacation on the front end. Don't pick me up. Because last time when he picked us up, he was fresh. So he came over and he was like, oh, we're going to see the world. Let's go to Peru. We're going to go here. We're going to go there. And the kids and I were like, Target, Starbucks, library, America. We didn't want to see anything. We wanted to go home, by the time he came. And so there was a lot of friction. We were in our Airbnb buckling down, just counting down the days until the flight home. And he came like an eager beaver, ready to see the world. And so it didn't work out. I said, listen, don't come get me. Just drop me off, spend all your vacation. Let's have a nice start. And the kids and I will make our way back home by ourselves. So that was kind of our plan anyway. And that's what we ended up doing. We just had to come home early after getting stuck. But yeah.
And where were you stuck? What country were you stuck in?
Everywhere. So we originally started in Greece and then we flew to France because the word on the street was that Americans could get home from Paris, and that ended up not working out for us.
Oh, wow.
And then we flew to Germany and got home. The Germans helped us. So so we kind of just flew around, literally flying around Europe, trying to get back to America. Hence me reading a whole bunch of books about America when I got back home. I was like, thank you, Lord. I love you, Lord. I love this country. I never want to leave. So
seriously.
Yeah.
And yet you are going to again, right? So,
yeah, I am.
Someday.
Yeah, no, definitely. We're committed. We're going to do all the continents.
Wow.
With the kids. We're on pace to do that before my oldest graduates. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
We'll see. Yeah.
I have friends if you need contacts.
Okay.
And I've got lots of friends all over Europe and it's one in China and some other places.
I'll take it because contacts are important. That's actually one of my pieces of advice I give people. I'm like, it's good. You can go travel around with the kids, but you got to have at least one phone number where you're going if all breaks loose, somebody you can call. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about language learning at home.
Okay.
When you're not traveling around, what have you been doing since you came back to continue this journey?
Okay. So when my money's not funny, we have a tutor who come to the house once a week. Some terms I'm able to do that, but to be honest with you, some terms I'm not, because it's even once a week is pricey.
Oh yeah.
And when we're not having someone come, we'll do online once or twice a week through like an online tutor. But I have to say, my goal during those times are not for my children to necessarily learn the language, but more to hear it being spoken by a native speaker. And the difference in why it's important is because what they're doing, the way that they're trying to teach them on these little learning lessons online and all that, that's not my style. So I'm not going to sit here and drill them when they get off, and I'm not making flashcards and doing all that. So as long as they're on the call and they're hearing that person speak to them and they do the best they can, that's the goal for that. The other thing for us are getting books that the children are very familiar with the story, but getting the story in Spanish. So we started with like The Hungry Little Caterpillar and really going, that has think of all the vocabulary in there, right? When you think about all the foods and size, large, big, small, and colors, a little bit of color in there, and things like the Three Billy Goats or Goldilocks or any type of story. We have Rapunzel, any type of story that they know intimately so they can kind of follow along. And we work broadly on vocabulary from those stories. And when I say a story, like we stay on the same book for the whole term, children's storybook. So we did the Hungry Little Caterpillar for the 11 or 12 weeks, just that one book. So
you just read it over and over again?
Well, we work on page by page and we kind of talk about like what's on that page. And then we'll start using those words at home. Like I'll try to use those words at home during this. So that's why I try not to pick books like about, dragons and moats and stuff. It's hard to use those words at home.
Right.
So things that have animals or colors or things that we can use in common conversation. So once we learn it, we look at it on that page of the book, we talk about it, and then I'm committed to working that in. And because I'm not fluent, I just work those words in as I can. So I might say, would you prefer a manzana today for your snack? Or would you prefer, I don't know, I'll ask with queso. Like, do you want cheese or do you want an apple? And so I'm using English in between the words that I know because that's what I could think of right now. I don't know. I can't do you prefer. I'd have to look that up. And so I don't know. It works. Like I said, we're not fluent, but I've seen it in action. And when my children were around people who only spoke Spanish, they spoke Spanish. My kids spoke Spanish to them. Did it sound great? Not great, but it was good enough. And they made friends and they were able to do it. So I feel like these are like the little things that are actually doable. I have purchased like Spanish programs before and everything. I personally can't stick with it. It's a lot. I'm not doing it. I'm just not going to be able to do all of that and commit to the short lessons. And I'm really committed to this and I love it, but Spanish is not the only thing we're doing.
Right.
So I find it's easier to find a way to teach them Spanish within the realm of the principles that we're following in our other lessons and not abandon all of that for the sake of the language.
Yeah, we had a native Spanish speaker who was from Spain. And so that's how we started out when my kids were younger. And she taught out of her home and it was so reasonably priced. She has since moved back to Spain, so my kids don't get to enjoy that. But she would play games with them, like children's games, like picture games a lot of times. She would work on vocabulary. She did very simple words. She did amazing things and just read them storybooks over and over, taught them little poems. She had them eventually memorize a play that they were to perform all in Spanish. And it was phenomenal. My kids learned a ton of stuff and they had the very Spain accent. So the very, with the S and the T talk. And so that was such a great thing. But, now I do have a book that I just use because I do like your approach, Amber. That's a great approach. Just coming up with words that you do know. I have a book just because sometimes I can't think of the things to do. And so I've used that, but I use it on my own. And so I don't necessarily, stick with it perfectly. It's an old 1940s textbook. So it's probably really archaic and not appropriate. It's a baseline. It gives me something to jump off of.
Yeah.
So
I think that's good. And I think, I use books as well. They're not textbooks. I just haven't had any, but also songbooks, like Spanish songbooks. So we'll sing little songs. My kids prefer like funny ones. so that they get the joke. Like if you understand the song in Spanish, you'll giggle when you get to that part. I find that those kind, and then a little bit of poetry, simple poems and things. And I use books for those because I don't know, and I find that to be helpful as well.
So for both of you, when the tutor is with your children, is this total immersion?
Yes.
Ours was, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
No English. Yeah. And for me, that's the only thing that'd be worth paying for, right? Because otherwise I could do it.
I know it's getting late, but before we wrap up, is there anything else that you guys think that is important about language learning, or even circling back to our big why or words of encouragement, just anything that you wanted to make sure you got to say today?
I was thinking when you were asking about when's the best time to get started, and I said right away, but I really wanted to encourage moms who didn't do it, who didn't start right away, because I started right away. You can say from birth with the littles, but with my older kids, no, because I wasn't convinced yet. I hadn't read that Charlotte Mason quote. And so I feel like it's never too late. And I hate when people say that. It's so trite, but with some things, it's actually true, because this is you're not going to arrive. Right? There's no end point to this. So it's just a matter of a journey. And so your child will leave your home eventually, and they'll all be at a different point in their language acquisition, a different point in their journey. But just being on the trip is good enough. It's good. And they can build from it too. The idea being that we are raising lifelong learners. And my expectation is not that when I stop guiding you in these lessons, that you would then stop learning the language.
Yeah.
I feel like you can start anytime.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And to not beat ourselves up, but just start.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that from a training or growth development point for the children, if you have a child who's a perfectionist, I have one like that. This has been good for her because she can't be perfect at it. And it's a good area for me to coach her in, that we're not looking for perfection, that it's just good enough is good enough. That's the best she can do. She can't do anymore. And so it's a place where she hits a ceiling really quickly. And it's been a good place for her to kind of grow and struggle with a little bit. There've been a few tears of frustration because she couldn't be really good at it. She wants to sit down and be great at things. And so I feel like it's a good training ground for anyone that does have a child like that.
That is such a good point.
Very encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's so easy for us to try to avoid things like that when we have difficulties. I don't know. Maybe you guys don't feel this way, but I feel like I just remember there were some issues early on in my motherhood where I was just kind of walking on eggshells around certain things because I didn't want to rock the boat with certain children about certain things or whatever. And then it was like one day I realized by avoiding this, I'm not allowing them to face the difficulty. I'm making things easy for us right now, but it's not really doing these children any favors. You're doing your daughter such a big favor to give her opportunities in a safe place to face the things that are hard for her. And it's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in a way that with no judgment, because I tell her, I'm like, honey, who can speak another language the moment they sit down and try? And so, that like taking that away from it, it's not personal anymore. This is just a fact of life. Yeah. No one in the world has been able to do that ever since the beginning of time. And so you aren't expected to do that. It would be a very odd, peculiar thing for you to do. So this is, those are the kinds of conversations, but that brings me to this slightly unrelated, but still related story. In the beginning, we'd go to the grocery store, and our local grocery store gives children balloons. And I would always get the same colors for all my kids so that they wouldn't fight over them. Makes total sense. But then as they started getting a little bit older, I was like, nonsense. You can have different colors. You're not going to fight over it. If the blue one was yours and the blue one you let go and it flew up in the air, then you don't have that blue one anymore. And we're going to have to work through that. Or if someone popped the yellow one, you know what I mean? Like I stopped trying to make such a fuss about these artificial situations that would prevent the children from having to deal with themselves and each other. And therefore keep the back of the van quiet all the time, right? I still like it to be quiet, but that's not real, right? So I started with that, that's not really related, but it made me think of that, like that I'm going to be open to you struggling a little bit for the greater good.
That's funny. Because when you told that story, I just thought about how for years, I assigned seating so that I didn't have to deal with people fighting over where they were going to sit.
Yeah.
And then it was the same kind of thing. I realized I'm not actually allowing them the chance to figure out how to negotiate. I'm just laying down the law, and that's how it's going to be. And we were probably old enough to negotiate. It's one thing to do that with toddlers, right? But exactly. It's like sometimes we forget, they're growing up, and we should probably let them grow up in these things too.
Yeah.
So, well,
it's good.
Thank you so much. This was such a good conversation. I just, you gave me a lot to think about. And actually, I will tell you, just personally, I had a child asking me about why he didn't get to start his sign language. And I was kind of just putting someone off. I think I needed this conversation to get me remotivated to, I have someone asking to learn a third language and I'm putting him off. What a terrible thing to do.
So I want to go on world schooling now.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm really convinced, and that you left your husband behind. Super, super fan. No.
My word.
Totally do this, because my husband does not have a job where he can work. He is a farmer. It's not happening.
You can't telecommute farming?
No. But I could go.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. And to come back and tell him about it and have those experiences and all of that. It's been really good. And it was for the kids, but honestly, who doesn't want to see the world? I mean, I've been enjoying myself on these trips.
Yeah. I might be contacting you later.
Seriously.
I'm here.
Abby drank the Kool-Aid today. Well, on that note, I shall bid you all farewell.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Amber. Again, this was great.
You are wonderful. And yes, I'm so encouraged. It was so great.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. This season's lineup is fantastic. All of the books and things mentioned in today's episode are linked in our show notes. Just go to skolesisters.com/SS84 to check it out. Remember to sign up for the Skole Sistership Sophie level so you get in on the Commonplace Workshop. We are very excited about this workshop and hope you'll be able to make it live tomorrow morning, February 20th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. This workshop is free for those of you who have a paid sistership membership. If you'd like to join the sistership and reap all the benefits, including this workshop, head over to skolesisters.com/sistership and sign up. As a Sophie member, you also get access to our bonus audio. I cut a huge chunk, over 10 minutes, from this episode, and I'm putting it in bonus audio very soon. If you want to hear some thoughts on some specific foreign language curricula, go to bonuses and listen. Our next episode is a group discussion about Skole. Do we even really know what it is? And how do we know if what we are doing actually counts? Am I doing Skole? That's the burning question for our next episode. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters. It's weird because I thought I had made it where the video couldn't even be turned on. I mean, not that I care that you're doing it. I'm like, I guess I didn't do the setting the way I thought I did.
Well, I just turned it on myself, so I don't know. Maybe I can just bypass.
Oh, maybe you can. I don't know. Maybe
because you're not the boss of me.
All right. Well, then, Abby, are you ready?
No, I just misplaced something.
Steve Nesbitt would be so disappointed in you. And so,